Morning, family. It is March the 30. All right. Headed into the coattails of April. It's good to see you all. I hope your endeavors and everything are going accordingly. So, evidently, a lot of, shall I say, presence around this movie Sinners. Okay. Now, I'm normally the type I like to let the dust settle, as it were. Meaning, when a movie first comes out, especially a highly anticipated film, um, I let people say what they're gonna say, and then I go back and view it from an auteur or an artist standpoint of view. Um, as a bluesman myself, I love the movie conceptually. I think it was well put together. I don't like calling films perfect or 10 out of 10 because even from the director or actor's chair, even some actors I've met, they don't even watch the movie at the premiere because, they have this, it's like a hybrid of imposter syndrome and just nerves, right? Because that art is very sensitive. Um, but I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the elements that people may not have seen. And in the next part of this, coming up right after, I'm going to talk about something that's very correspondent with the adage about art imitating life as it relates to the ultra talented director Ryan Coogler. Got a lot of respect for him. So, real quick, and this is going to be more of a walk through the symbolism. Even before we get to the story, if we look at the word sinners, and this isn't about belief or decoding, it's just bringing, magnifying light to what's already there. Decoding has become mainstream again, and anybody who knows, basic Latin, anytime you put the two letters DE in front of something, you're coming down from it. So to decode means to bring things into simple form, to bring it down from a code. What people have gotten in the habit of doing is creating a code and then using their ego to fuel it and then gaining followers and saying it's the truth. Totally different roller coaster. So when we look at the word sinners, right, we have the word S, it also ends with S. Okay. Now, the remaining letters spell the word inner. Just keep that in, you know what I mean? Keep that in the forefront of your mind. And obviously, the two characters played by Mike B. masterfully, I might add, Smoke and Stack. Very important, especially if you know the history of the blues and that whole region of Clarksdale and the inception of that art form and how it came to be, referring to Smokestack Lightning. But beyond that, even the protagonist's name, the prodigy, right? Golden boy, as it were, Samuel. His name literally means, the one who heard God, the one who could hear God. It's very cool artistic choice to name him that and then have his father be a pastor, right? So, and again, I'm not going through, this is what happened, it started in October, and I'm not going through everything. It's much too long. And most people have seen the film by now. If you haven't, you should at least view it, you know what I'm saying, just to get a grip on, that historical narrative. Uh, I'm still on the positive side of things, right? So, but remember I guess you could say the genesis of the story when it's talking about the griots and the fire kings, the basically the mediums who were gifted with the gift of making music, and so on and so forth, right? But the last sentence of that little dialogue was it can also attract evil. So we have the son of a preacher, you know what I mean, who could hear God, which on a symbolic level, it means the one who can hear his calling, one who can. This is my interpretation. Again, this isn't a decode or break it down or this is no. That's not how all movies are intended to work. Okay, um, but in the movie it said it can also attract evil. So you have the one who can hear God, but who had God's gift. It would seem to him would be to create music that people could hear. And obviously, music being a spiritual medium, it always has been, darker forces could hear it too. So that sets the premise for, you know, this, vampiric element of, soul sucking and stealing our stuff. And there's some connotations under there with, taking the rights and it's my music and this is our thing. So I found it cool that the team was able to insert elements of origin and not even ownership, but just authenticity, because it showed the plantation economy and culture that continued well into the 20th century. It showed how basically back in those days, blues was the way rap is viewed now. Just a little timeline. If you're in your 30s, sad for a reason, on your early 40s, 8 times out of 10, regardless of your background, at some point somebody in your life said, stay away from that rap music. Chill out with that rap music, especially if you had a professional pedigree in your family, teachers or principals, community people, right? Pillars of community. But back then it was the same, but it was just with blues music because you gotta plant your consciousness back then, when we talk about the club and the blues and then we get the liquor and all this type of stuff. So it wasn't just something to do back then. It was seen as like a detour into darker worlds, right? And then we echo this tale about, Robert Johnson. And I loved at the end how they inserted like a living blues legend. That was really cool to me. I was a little perplexed though when I guess Stack at the end, was it 62 years later in the story? He comes to the living blues legend, when they're at the bar towards the end, and he smells him and he's like, you ain't got much longer. I don't know what that was about. I don't want to speak that on him. But that was cool as well. So we got Inner, right? We're talking about the core. And then on N you have Smoke, and then N you have Stack. So without going through the whole plot, because that's not what I'm trying to do at all. I see Samuel as that third S, right? And this is my opinion. This isn't, I'm not decoding. That's the last time I'm going to say it, beating a dead horse. But I see Smoke as, might be one, right? He's wearing the blue. You have Stack, who's wearing the red. So they're clearly, host forces, and of course they're twins. Same but different. But then I think in the middle, you have the third S, Samuel, the one who could hear maybe God and the other guy, right? This could have been intentional. This could be my own artistic viewpoint, but that's the way I see it because those are the three central characters. And what was so magical cinematically about Samuel and his mediumship is that the seed was planted that he was playing Charlie Patton's guitar, who of course is a Delta legend. So that even though we found out that that was, fabricated, that ignited his passion because he understood the rank and tier of blues musicianship that he had been invited to. Because in his mind, even if he didn't articulate it, he was saying, like he was saying in the car, like, it plays just right. Can't believe y'all gave me this thing. Best thing you could have did, right? Not knowing that was actually, if you strip it down and just use common sense, that was a family heirloom, right? Because if Smoking Stacks are his cousins and it was their fathers, as he found out towards the end of the film, it was a family heirloom. So he was actually the present day griot, or the medium to that spirit world via the music and the template set at the very beginning. I thought that was just unbelievably artistic, and things like that should be more treasured instead of, using it as some sort of, that was a dope movie. Like I've really, and I know it's not everybody's gift to discern symbology and I guess study movies like that, but beyond the music and the liquor and the dancing and the screenplay, the acting, all the external that we could receive from it, there was still a symbolic element. Because anytime you're dealing with, and I'm sure Ryan Coogler knows this, anytime you're dealing with anything ancestral that had a real legacy, you're dealing with like very alive energies. You don't film a movie in such a historic place and not have any reverence or respect for just the energy you're working with. It's not about liking or disliking, it's about energy you're working with. All right. So that was my kind of like a mild synopsis of how those elements were brought together, okay? And then, of course, in the movie, everybody has aside from my little word game I just did with it, everybody has a proximity to that word, right? And then we explore the themes of the time, stay away from that devil music, niggas bootlegging, trying to, the Irish beer and stuff. The club, sweat, drink, eat, eat, drink, sweat, tea, stink, right? Partying, having a good time. That's an element of sin, not evil, but especially in those days, you gotta approach it contextually. You got sin, right? And you got your married women stepping out, right? Then you got your youngster drinking, even though back then, little less supervision. You had my man Delroy's character, the old timer that's literally drank all his troubles away. And then your Irish folks and them marching out of the night, and I'm gonna talk about that more in the next segment of this. Getting pretty close to the end here, but then your interracial affairs and stuff like that. Down to the organizations that ran things in that time in that area. So everybody's relationship with sin, wrongdoing, you know what I mean? Engaging in their passions in this time, right? That was just a interesting word to kind of put in the center of the spider web, and every character in one form or another has a link to that word based on their choices in their life. I even heard somebody say that I guess Smoke's love interest, right? That was an element of sin because people, depending on your mentality back then, they had a very negative view of, your hoodoo and root work and things of that sort. So I loved it, honestly. But in the next part, I'm going to talk about the whole art imitating life. And the only clue I'll give right now is kind of the revelation they had when, what was his name? Rennick. Basically, him at the door telling them the scoop on, the whole kind of, from the first scene you see, right? So that's just a intro into what I saw. By now, you should have seen the movie. I'm not spoiling anything. Definitely worth the watch. I would definitely say in the Pantheon of New Black Classics. And honestly, it opened, those potential gates for more films of that ilk. I'll be honest. I thought people were afraid to touch those narratives just based on the folklore and this whole kind of material that they put around this certain type of narrative, right? So taboo, so off limits, so spooky, don't go over there type stuff. But I'm gonna move on to the second part of this.